Hello and welcome to Smarking Out, a brand new show from WrestleTalk TV's podcast network, where myself, James Trupany, will be joined by Gavin Duenis.
Hello.
To discuss the big subjects in pro wrestling today. This show is going to be a bit different to the Squash and a bit different to the Trupany show. We're going to tackle one big thing and give you a lot of information about that thing and our thoughts on that big thing, whatever it is from week to week. Now, our big thing for today is World of Sports Wrestling. And World of Sports Wrestling had a comeback in a very emotional and momentous occasion on television on New Year's Eve. So we thought we would give you a full rundown and give it its full due as a proper pay-per-view type wrestling event. Gavin, what's your initial thoughts of the whole show?
I generally thought it was positive. I think it was hindered by the fact that it was almost a pilot, and they couldn't be as episodic as I would like them to be, because basically they had to tell a whole story and probably a broader story than I would like to see told if it was a week-to-week show. But I think it had it did a lot of the things that I'd say WWE and certain other, certainly North American wrestling promotions, do wrong. I thought they did quite well. I liked that the authority figure was there to ensure that cheating was punished, and that there were ramifications for cheating. I liked the general story with Grado and Dave Mastiff. I thought that there were some of the wrestlers who were featured have got a lot of promise as far as being characters who I think can show more layers to them. I'd say that my main criticism is that I don't think they looked at the things that have been done wrong as far as trying to appeal to a mass audience in the last 10 or 15 years in wrestling, and try to avoid those things. I think in some ways it was a little bit too WWE light. Yeah,
I think I can agree with you there. I mean, the actual production I was really impressed with. There's a couple of things I'd change. I wasn't over keen on the crash zooms on every bump. That I could probably have done without. But other than that, the actual production values, the show looked amazing. It looked like the best wrestling show Britain's ever produced.
It looked. I mean, you do have to look. You have to attain a certain level to compete with WWE, and I think TNA have done a good job of that over the years with the sort of limited resources and limited availability. They've done well, and I think this looked more like a TNA show than a WWE show. If I was in charge, I would certainly make certain tweaks to the aesthetics. I think a ramp is kind of overdone and just unnecessary. I think why not try to look different to WWE and TNA? And I think there's a couple of other little details like that. But certainly, as far as the production and just the way it looked like a slick wrestling show, and I think that's what you need.
Okay then. Well, let's go match by match, like we do with most pay-per-views here on WrestleTalk, and try and give everybody their even due. The first match was for a title: Dave Mastiff versus Grado. Now, the independent character of Dave the Bastard Mastiff and trying to bring that to a family-friendly TV audience, I think they did that really, really well. I think that having Shar Samuels and Johnny Moss as his crew was very good casting, and they knew what they were doing, and I thought it was a really interesting way of going about it. I wasn't over keen on this story because essentially it was what Grado did in ICW, but it took ICW 2 years and they did it in 2 hours. But I can forgive that because they had to get a lot of stuff done in those 2 hours. So I thought it was really interesting, and I thought the match quality was quite high. Grado doesn't get a chance really in TNA to do this kind of match because he's comedy. That's his job, But he did this really well, I thought, and I thought Mastiff is always a great foil as a heel, and I think I really enjoyed his work. What did you think, Gavin?
I thought it was a good match. I thought it was realistic enough. I think Grado is, as much as I think Grado has a lot of positives, I think he is sometimes falls a little bit too much back into the comedy stuff, and I think that you can have comedy in wrestling. The Rock, Roddy Piper, Steve Austin, Mick Foley, they were all very, very funny, but above all, they were serious characters and generally played it straight. And I think Grado sometimes becomes a little bit of a Dusty Rhodes parody. And I was surprised that they made 2 or 3 comparisons to Dusty Rhodes. And I sort of think sometimes it's best to not acknowledge when there are some of the similarities are too obvious. Sometimes it's best not to bring attention to that because it kind of seems a bit like he's copying Dusty Rhodes. But I thought the match itself was good. I liked I liked that there was a very clear heel face dynamic. I think Grado has the charisma and the personality to clearly be the baby face and the one that you root for, within a matter of seconds of a new viewer who's maybe not really, doesn't really follow wrestling, doesn't know who anyone is. Straight away, it would be pretty clear who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. And I thought it generally told a good story. I mean, I said it before when we discussed what they should do. I think starting it off with two fat blokes sends possibly a bit of a negative message to the masses. Grado's not a fat bloke, to be fair. No. And Dave Mastiff looks tough. He looks hard. So, it could have been worse. Yeah. But I do think it plays to a certain negative stereotype and a certain negative image of British wrestling. And that's not necessarily... It just wasn't needed. They're both good characters. I understand it's a 2-hour show and you're trying to tell a very quick story. It's almost trying to turn around, like you say, a long-term story in 2 hours. And if you're picking your best face and your best heel, then, they've certainly both got an argument that that's what they are. So I can understand doing it, but I do think that it's a shame that they couldn't have picked wrestlers who looked a bit more like athletes.
Mastiff was, he's been my pick as one of the best character wrestlers of 2016. His work in progress has been phenomenal. And Grado has been really, really good. He didn't have as good a year in 2016 as he did in 2015, but then again, you don't sell out the SEC in Glasgow and win the ICW title every year either, do you? So, it's. I think they did well with this match, and I enjoyed the match. And then we moved on to a 4-way ladder match. Kenny Williams, who defeated CJ Banks, Danny Hope, and Sam Bailey in a perfectly serviceable ladder match. It wasn't particularly great. It wasn't particularly bad. It was safe. That was a good thing. And also the safety warnings going through the show were very sensible as well, I thought. We don't want any accusations of backyarding, do we?
No, I think that was perfectly understandable, and it was a good thing. I wish they'd concentrated a bit more on calling them wrestlers during those messages rather than, there was a couple of times a message came out saying about don't copy the stunts they do. I didn't like that at all. I don't like the idea that what they're doing are stunts, even though a lot of the time they are, especially in this kind of match. Yeah. And this is a sort of match that, I'd say this was the most egregious example of them trying to be WWE light, but I also understand that to a hardcore wrestling fan, there are a lot of fans who are into that kind of match where it's just a bit of a spot fest, and to a new fan, it at least is attention grabbing. It's there's a lot of action going on. It's not my style of wrestling, and I mean that in the sense that I think you draw money doing a different style of wrestling. And I also just don't particularly personally enjoy watching these kind of matches, but I was interested to I think it was the guy who won brought a skateboard to the ring. 1989, the dynamic dudes were being booed for bringing a skateboard to the ring, and I'm very surprised that 27 years later someone would have still thought it was a good idea.
Well, you can't have everything, can you? And no. There is precedent with Mark Andrews, who's been doing it for a while as well.
It's kind of funny because wrestling fans do seem to be, they're supposedly sort of smarter than they've ever been, and yet, what would there aren't many things I would want to boo more than a wrestler bringing a skateboard to the ring, like basically dressing like it's 1991 and their hero is Bart Simpson.
Fair enough. I can understand that. But yeah, I thought it was a serviceable match. I thought it was okay. I thought it was... I'll be honest with you, I hadn't seen any of the guys in the matches before. This was that kind of cruiserweight style in the UK scene isn't something I've picked up on lately from the matches that I've been watching. So it was a bunch of new talents that I'd not seen, and I think that's good. They were showcasing... Obviously, these guys were good, or else they wouldn't have got this far, but they were showcasing new faces. They weren't just going with the same guys you kind of would have thought they would have picked. And also it's down to availability as well. But those 4 guys are going to go through the roof on the indie scene in the UK. And
there was a good amount of star power on the show generally. So, they gave ITV something to tweet some GIFs about, some of the cool spots they were doing. Again, it's not my style. It's not what I would do if I was trying to make money out of a wrestling promotion. But it had a place on the card, and they looked like athletes, and it was cool to people who find that kind of thing cool.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of star power, the Coffey brothers, Joe and Mark Coffey, defeated Ashton Smith and Rampage Brown in a cracking tag match. I have to say, all ends up. Joe Coffey has been getting lots and lots of coverage this year for his matches with Kurt Angle and various people in WCPW. And obviously, Rampage Brown is Rampage Brown, and he's exceptionally good. Done an awful lot of good work for NGW and for Progress as well. This was cracking, I thought. Really enjoyed this. Good big lads wrestling match.
It reminded me of the Revival in a lot of ways. Just really good, kind of by the book, but in a very good way. You know, just a classic standard tag team match. I think Rampage Brown is someone who I would like to see really showcased as a singles wrestler if it was to become a series. You know, I think he can be someone who starts off as a kind of heel you love to hate and could potentially go on to be the top babyface, I think, down the line. So I was surprised to see him and Smith lose, but then Smith took the pinfall, and he seems like someone who's more about the character and can absorb a pinfall. Yeah. So I, like you say, a really, really good match, and I think it showcased all four as very strong talents.
Yeah, I mean, Rampage Brown I saw he's the current Atlas champion in Progress. And obviously, being from Yorkshire, when they went to Sheffield, he was stunningly over as a face. You know, and then wrestled Dave Mastiff in a cracking match.
and he's, I mean, what I liked about them as a team really was that, I mean, they were nasty. They had an edge, but they weren't just cheating like crazy. You know, they weren't just generating heat in that kind of way that you know, someone like The Miz does, or even Ric Flair. You know, that they were more like the kind of Brock Lesnar style heels, where they were just so tough, and that means that you can turn into a babyface very easily and very effectively.
Yeah, it gives you those edges to the character that you need.
Yeah.
Then we moved on to Viper versus Alexis Rose in the only female match on the card, which is kind of disappointing, but you know, I would like to see more, but that's me. And again, perfectly serviceable match. Viper is exceptional and currently on a plane to Tokyo as we speak to do the next Stardom tour. Alexis Rose, I actually interviewed on the Friday before for one of the magazines that I work for, and she's a very intelligent, well put together professional young lady and had only been in the business for 2 years. And she's packed an awful lot into those 2 years, so I was very impressed with her. What are your thoughts on this, Gavin?
I thought it, like you said, really good, serviceable match. I think Viper has something about her that you can see she's a star. Alexis Rose was perfectly serviceable in her role as the underdog babyface. I mean, in one way, it was disappointing, like you say, that there was only one female match. But I don't mind that at this point. You know, I think it can be something that could be increased if there was a series. You know, they could kind of end up with more of a female roster. As far as just showcasing two good British female talents and having just a thoroughly decent match, I think it ticked a lot of the boxes. And I was surprised that they said it was the first female match they've ever had on World of Sport. I mean, obviously it's 30 years since it was on TV, but it's the first time they've ever had two females in a match against each other. That's good to have it as the only female match on the show, because then you can, you know, make a big deal of it in a way.
I hadn't thought of it like that. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Max Crabtree, who used to run Joint Promotions, is an absolute misogynistic sexist. And that's the reason why there was no women's wrestling on ITV.
Even though his brother was called Shirley.
Yeah. Once said that when the British Boxing Board of Control give licenses to women, then I might consider promoting female wrestlers.
Those Crabtree brothers were the best, weren't they?
Oh, yes. But yeah, he did, and that's the reason why. I also don't think ITV were too keen on the idea, because it had lots of negative connotations back in the day, which we kind of got past a bit now, I think.
Yeah, we're far more liberal and open-minded now that we're happy to see two women beat each other up for our amusement.
Well, so a couple of people did point out online that, you know, if this was an indie show, Viper would have got a shot in the Battle Royal later in the card.
Yeah, and I like the way they didn't do that. I think they should be. This is going to sound like something from the 1950s, but women should be kept separate. I think in a wrestling show, I don't like
so close to same but equal but different.
I don't like it when they have the women wrestling against the men. I think it's far better to just have a women's roster and treat the women like big stars. it's kind of the same as mixing cruiserweights and heavyweights. I'd rather they were just kept separate and they were kind of stars within their own right in their own division.
Okay, speaking of which, Klondike Kate was one of the guests at ringside who did actually wrestle quite a few blokes in her time. And Mark Rocco, Marty Jones, Johnny Saint, Brian Dixon were all guests at ringside. How did you feel about the links of the old school World of Sport material into the actual show itself?
I didn't have any problem at all with the way that they linked in the World of Sport. I liked that there was a little bit of a nod to history. I liked that it kind of gave it a little bit of gravitas to that. This isn't just a brand new thing. This is something that used to be a massive deal in Britain. One thing that I was probably less keen on is that there were quite a few acknowledgements of the American wrestling scene. There was one point where I can't remember who it was, but there was a super kick, and JR described it as sweet chin music. And I didn't really like that kind of thing. I kind of think that you should act as though these are the British stars are as big as the American stars, and present, past and present, and it's kind of goes back to the same thing about the comparison of Grado and Dusty Rhodes. Don't keep telling us that Grado is like Dusty Rhodes. Just let Grado be himself, because he's a really good act without having to tell us he's like this other bloke in America years ago. I think the World of Sport link was obvious and it was there, and it was certainly worth acknowledging. I like that they have that they have that nod to history by having some of the wrestlers present, and a little bit of a video package where they talked about the great wrestlers of the past. But I wouldn't go too into detail as far as acknowledging American wrestlers.
No, I think you're about right there. They got the balance about right. They could have gone overboard with some of the things that they did, and they didn't. It was nicely presented. It was very respectful. A lot of names mentioned that I didn't think they would, and they did. So yeah.
And it wasn't as though they were making out that those people were better than the current day ones. I think that's really important. That the wrestlers on this show were treated as though they were the stars, and to acknowledge history is a really good thing, but to do what WWE has certainly been guilty of at times recently, and act as though the everyday wrestlers that you're watching aren't as big as the guys from the past. That's a big mistake, and they certainly didn't do that.
Yeah, and also, you've got Mark Rocco and Marty Jones there, two guys who literally changed the way we look at professional wrestling. And you didn't, like you said, you didn't harp on about it. They did change professional wrestling for the better, and they made pro wrestling better than it was before. But, those are the guys who are training the people now. Alexis Rose is a Marty Jones trainee. They're the people that have moved on into that next realm. So, and, Johnny Saint soon starts with the Performance Center in WWE to train wrestlers there. So, they're finally getting their due, and this show is part of that. So I'm really proud.
And we don't know. It may be only dozens. It might be hundreds or thousands of people watching who haven't watched wrestling on British TV since World of Sport, and saw that wrestling was on and thought, I'll watch that, see what it's like these days. And
yeah,
I think that there could be people who recognise those wrestlers and are pleased to see them. And so I don't think there are really any negatives to the way that they were presented.
No. All right then, moving on. Singles match was El Ligero and Zach Gibson. Probably the best match on the show, to be honest, and really well put together, as you'd expect from El Ligero and Zach Gibson. They are fantastic wrestlers. I love Zach Gibson in I hate him kind of way. He's fantastic, and Ligero is hardest working luchador in wrestling. So, what do you think of this, Gavin?
Yeah, I thought that I was really pleased that Zach Gibson was such a clearly defined heel in the match, that it wasn't just two guys doing high spots. I think El Ligero is the kind of wrestler who can certainly have that widespread appeal to casual fans, to people who are just kind of tuning in and trying it out. I think that the key to it though is that he is the guy doing the high flying moves. It's not that he's just against another guy, and they're both being amazing athletes. I like that Zach Gibson was grounded. He was playing heel. He was being tough and mean. He was kind of taking the occasional shortcut, and so the El Ligero was the babyface because he was doing the dazzling moves. So yeah, I think that's. I mean, they're of course. If this was to turn into a series, you would want both of those as key members of your roster, I think.
Did you see any of the pre-publicity on ITV Good Morning?
No, I didn't. I didn't see any publicity for it. I don't really watch ITV a lot, but I did see that they were on Good Morning Britain, but I missed it. Was it good? Was it being mocked by the presenters?
It was. I didn't see all of it either. But the bits I saw of it were like, they were working in character and trying to present the show in much the same way as people have done in the States for years, using like morning TV shows and things like that as special guest appearances, and I think it was the right thing to do. A lot of people moan, well, it'd been better if they'd done it out of character, but it's like, well, that's not really what you're trying to present. You're trying to present a serious show. So if the wrestlers are in character, that means they're going to take themselves seriously. So I was into it. I thought it was pretty good, and a cool shot of Zach Gibson ended up underneath the Good Morning to Britain Christmas tree after being dealt with by Ligero. It was a nice way to end it and put some cliffhanger to what was happening in the show, I thought. So
I 100% believe that they should be in character.
Yeah,
I think that's another thing that just because American promotions have been doing it for a long time, there's no reason why we should go down that road at all. I think it always works better to keep as much of a facade as you can, so people know it's not real. They know it's maybe not entirely how it appears. Then you give them all the less reason to invest emotionally.
Okay, then we'll move on. World of Sport title, number one contendership battle royal, which was eventually won by Grado. But with a special guest appearance of Davey Boy Smith Jr., Harry Smith as we know him, presumably between contracts for Noah and New Japan Pro Wrestling. So this was clever. I like this. It was a bit of a cliffhanger there, because they'd said, Mr. Beasley, who is the manager of World of Sport Wrestling, had said he had a trick up his sleeve for this battle royal. And yeah, Harry Smith coming out, it got a big pop from the crowd. And, it harks back to those days of World of Sport. And, yeah, I think it was a really well-done Battle Royal. It's a Battle Royal. Battle Royals are Battle Royals. And this was as Battle Royally as Battle Royally gets. One
thing I didn't get was why he was allowed to enter the Battle Royal later than everybody else. Because not only had everyone else already wrestled, so they were tired, but he only came in when there were 3 men left. So it didn't seem very much like a babyface move to me. I don't know if I missed something.
No, I agree with you. I think it would have been, if it had been in a Royal Rumble kind of style gauntlet, TNA gauntlet style match, then I think it would have made more narrative sense.
Yeah, it just seemed. I mean, the easy way around it is just to do some ring entrances, and his is just the last one. Yeah. But it seemed like I know they were going for a surprise, but I don't like it when they suspend logic for the sake of a surprise. Yeah. But that's nitpicking. He did get a big reaction from the crowd. I was surprised he was the first man out once he entered the match. So, he came in as this really big deal. And within about 2 minutes, he'd been eliminated. But then it worked in again at the end where he came to Grado's rescue.
The Battle Royal then led to the championship match between Dave Mastiff and Grado, which is a classic Memphis story of the woe-begotten underdog babyface having to go through the entire roster and then face the champion who's had 2 hours rest. But I think, again, it was a perfectly serviceable match, and there was nothing wrong with what it did, and it got a big pop, which was what you were after with the in-ring crowd, and it told the story really well. What did you think, Alan?
Well, you wouldn't want 2 new world champions crowned every single week if it was an episodic show, and that's another, kind of another example of something which, I would completely scale back if it became a series. But in the story they told over 2 hours, it was absolutely fine, and I thought this was a really good match. I liked that Mastiff dominated, and it was. Grado was at a massive disadvantage because he'd been injured at the end of the Battle Royal, and then he kind of came back and just got the win out of nowhere. I just think it was a really good story, a basic story, but a good one. I thought thought the general story of the match was just really, really well told, and I liked one thing I liked about the show, kind of all around, was just that attention to detail, and that they focused really strongly on heels and babyfaces. When a heel cheated, or when a heel was just doing something that wasn't very nice, JR was appalled by it. And this match was I think the best example of that. Where Dave Mastiff was just he was almost trying to get himself disqualified, and the referee wouldn't disqualify him because he knew that, and then Grado managed to get the win. So did Dave Mastiff look weak? I suppose would probably be my only concern, that Grado beat him up despite everything he'd gone through. But the fact it was a little bit of a fluke victory, I think it was perfectly fine, and it actually kind of sets them up going forward to have more matches with each other.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, really. Even if this doesn't get picked up as a TV series, we don't know what will happen with this. But if it doesn't get picked up as a TV series, the one thing I did put out on Twitter when the show had finished, I said that is the sound of every wrestler in the country putting the kettle on with a smile on their face, because this is massive exposure for every wrestling company and for every wrestling show. You know, this is like, you know, there were some grumbles about, well, we didn't have Marty Scurll, you didn't have Will Ospreay, and you didn't have Zack Sabre Jr., and you didn't have Jimmy Havoc, and it's like, well, those guys have jobs. And
you can't have every single British wrestler, but they had enough really good British acts that it didn't seem like it was just a second-rate show. It felt like big stars and, you know, the guys who really knew what they were doing.
Yeah, I think that was...
And would not have looked out of place in WWE or TNA or anywhere else. You know, they looked, for the most part, they looked like athletes. They moved like athletes, and the ones who didn't look particularly athletic looked like they could beat you in a fight.
Yeah.
So it was. I thought it was, and I liked the. There was a backstage. There were a couple of backstage segments involving Dave Mastiff, and I liked that he seemed kind of very difficult to control.
Yeah,
you know, and that's another thing that they don't do very well in WWE and in TNA and in others. And I think just having the wrestlers as the stars. The one person I liked the least on the show was the backstage interviewer Rachel.
Yeah, she seemed a bit wet.
Yeah, and she seemed a bit sort of like she reminded me of. Do you remember Lollipop? Was she called Lollipop from the very early days of TNA? She may not have been called Lollipop. Anyway, she was. She sort of almost tried to steal the scene.
Yeah,
I don't think that's the job of the interviewer.
I think also she didn't sell very well.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was like she was. She should have been intimidated. She should have been cowering. There was one point where Samuels and Moss were trying to sort of stop her going in the office, and she just barged in and said, "No, I'm going." That's not good.
Yeah, you should have taken a step back and then, "No, I'm a journalist, and this is my integrity. I'm going." At least.
Yeah. It was just that, yeah, like you say, she didn't sell.
Yeah, which is you know, these are kinks that can be worn out. This isn't
absolutely
like absolute death knell stuff. This is, I still say overall the show was very good. Just good.
It was a very good show. It told a good story throughout. Every match had a reason to exist. Every match was. There wasn't a bad match on the show. And I think it was a good showcase for British wrestling, and it's a sort of match that if you did tune in, you're not really a wrestling fan. I think there was a reason to stay tuned, and there's a reason to kind of look forward to seeing wrestling again. And that is whether it's picked up as a series or just the next time there's a local wrestling show nearby.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, just to give you an idea of other people's opinions other than ours, Cage Match readers scored it as 6.3 out of 10. Which is not bad, really, because Cage Match guys, people who read Cage Match are like the nerds of pro wrestling, like me. So if they think it's pretty good, it's probably pretty good. Any other comments you'd like to make on the show? So, looking at the whole production, what did you think of JR and Alex? Because we said JR was a good get, and obviously Alex Shane, who is a member of the Wrestle Talk podcast network, and the founder of Wrestle Talk, I thought he did a really good job on commentary. In fact, I think it was the best job I've heard him do on commentary. He obviously commentates a lot for NGW, and I've heard his commentary a lot in the last 12 months to 2 years. I thought it was really good. I thought it was well balanced. You were right about the American references, probably could have done without them. But what did you think, Gavin?
I thought they both were generally good. I think that Jim Ross sounded like he was engaged, and he seemed to enjoy calling a more of a sort of a formulaic wrestling product. You know, I think he's at his most comfortable when it's a babyface against a heel. You know, when it's that kind of classic wrestling tale playing out in front of him, rather than the minefield that is sort of modern WWE commentary, which also I don't think is a successful way to present wrestling. I thought Alex Shane was really good as well. He's sort of like our boss, I suppose, isn't he? So I've got to say nice things. But no, I thought he enhanced it. I liked that he wasn't just playing I liked that he wasn't just all out heel. You know, he was adding colour. He wasn't just taking the sides of the heels indiscriminately. He was adding to the story by just making those comments from a wrestler's perspective, that kind of helped the viewer to understand what was going on. I definitely thought they were one of the stronger aspects of the show.
No, I agree with you. I thought they were really, really good, and it was nice to see them start the show, 2-band shot. This looks like a big event. This looks like something worth watching. It's the traditional WWE way to start a pay-per-view, and if it worked for them, then it's going to work for you. It was well put together. I really enjoyed that commentary style. You know, I listen to Jim Ross a lot on New Japan commentary, and he sometimes seems a little out of his depth, which sounds daft, doesn't it? But there's a lot of things New Japan's all about detail, and sometimes if you haven't been watching it for, you know, like the layer of the story is kind of, you miss a lot, in fact. And obviously Alex has done a lot of New Japan commentary as well. So they both have that in common, and I think that probably helped them out in the long run, because, you know, this is a lot simpler to deal with, and it made a lot of sense the way they commentated. I was going to say Alex was more Jesse Ventura than Jerry Lawler, which I think was a very good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there were times when he certainly set the sides of the heels, but he wasn't just being ridiculous. It didn't feel like he was saying things just purely to annoy you. And I think that makes a good color commentator. You know, that he was adding his analysis, even sometimes with a little bit of a bias. But that's a perfectly good way for a color commentator to be.
The one thing we were both kind of terrified of was whether we were going to get a Smarky audience, and that did not happen.
There were a couple of moments where they tried to. I mean, especially my least favourite audience moment of the episode was when Mastiff was cutting a promo and they started doing the what chant. I mean, that was just, that really irritated me. But generally, yeah, it was, and I think part of it is that they were subtly encouraged to cheer the baby faces and boo the heels. They weren't, you know, WWE sort of fights against itself by having commentators say, you do whatever you've got to do to win. You know, yeah. So why would you care whether the heel cheats? You know, this did a really good job of effectively establishing why heels are heels and why babyfaces are babyfaces, both in the wrestling style and in the commentary for the audience watching at home, and so it gives you a reason to be outraged by cheating, and I think that makes a massive difference. You know, I think WWE has kind of allowed a monster to get out of control and has actually fed that monster when they should not have done, and it is very refreshing to see a wrestling show where no one's trying to be cool and trying to go against the grain and cheer for the heels because the heels, you know, are maybe the more talented wrestlers or whatever.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And to be honest with you, that crowd was a Smarky crowd under normal circumstances, just because I've seen loads of those guys at Progress in Manchester. You know,
the crowd got a lot of airtime, didn't they?
They did. There's lots of shots of the crowd
all over the screen.
Yeah, so it's like I'm looking out like, I know him. He was stood at the bar. He tripped up Dave Mastiff last time. Yeah, so
I think there is that willingness, though. Generally, you know, it's not always going to be 100% the case, but there is the willingness that if you're given that framework that the show is being presented within, that the fans are that much more willing to go along with the narrative. You know, I think WWE's problem is that they've just said to the fans, do whatever you want, and you know that leads to sometimes a very hot crowd, but often a smarky crowd that's completely out of step with the narrative. And I just think it makes for a better show when the reactions of the fans are the reactions that you're expected to react like.
I think also, first rule of Progress, the first thing that is said over the PA by Jim Smallman at every Progress show is, the first rule of Progress is, don't be a dick. And that is instilled in a generation of wrestling fans of, we're not going to go against what the promotion wants. It's subliminal, but it works. Fan favorites in Progress generally get received as fan favorites. Heels in Progress get received as heels. People lose themselves in the moment. They are willing to believe in what they are seeing, and that transferred into this crowd, who largely, by the looks of them, were Progress fans and future Attack Pro Wrestling fans and Future Shock Wrestling fans from the promotions from the Manchester area. They probably will go to those shows, and they were doing the same thing here, and you know that has filtered through and made it a much more enjoyable experience for everybody.
You know, why should I go along with the WWE narrative when they don't respect me, when they push Roman Reigns in spite of the fact that I can't stand Roman Reigns? You know, and I think that adds a lot to it. You know, a show like this one, the World of Sport show, didn't give you any reason to be upset with the promotion.
No.
And progress doesn't give its audience reason to resent progress.
No.
And I think that is a key difference comparing it to WWE.
Right then, well, thank you for listening to our new show today. I'm James Troopin. You can find me at Sheriff Lone Star on Twitter. You can find Gavin at Gavin Duenas, also on Twitter. And you can find the show at WTTV Smarking Out, also on Twitter. And, of course, WrestleTalk TV at WrestleTalk_TV on Twitter as well. If you want to comment on the show, tell us what you think, and suggest big subjects for us to discuss. We're looking at big things. We want to know what you want to know about in the wrestling industry, and we'll give you our honest opinions about what we think is happening and what could happen again in the future. Thank you very much for listening today. Please listen to the other shows on the WrestleTalk TV podcast network, such as The Troopany Show, which this week will be about New Japan's massive show at the Tokyo Dome, Wrestle Kingdom 11, and also Gavin's other show, The Squash, which I'm sure you'll be talking about wrestling, won't you?
That's the plan, yeah. That's our kind of tentative subject for next week's show.
Okay then, thank you for listening to Smarking Out. Take care. Goodbye.